Thank you so much. I am very honored to be here today. Unfortunately, I am just a very normal person. As you will see in my presentation, it will be sometimes difficult, sometimes maybe boring, sometimes dull, but it will be only fact-based. I will show you scientific data from peer-review-based scientific journals, and I will come back to that. This very morning, I was so sad to hear on the television news that Danes are not longer the most happy people in the world. It's actually people from Panama in the Middle Americas. But I know that you actually are the most happy people. For a Swede, it's always wonderful to come to Denmark, and particularly I would say to Copenhagen. You have so much to offer us, and it's lovely to be here. And as you heard before, please do not interrupt. Have a piece of paper and a pen. Take down whatever comments or questions or suggestions you have, and we save them for the general discussion. Also, it's extremely important that you do not, and maybe I don't even have to say this, because you are really eagles and I'm a small, small sparrow. But you should not blindly and blue-eyedly trust what I tell you. Do not let your children or your own future depend on this day. Be critical. Bring out the relevant scientific literature. Read for yourself. It's all out there in the public domain. Discuss in between, compare, investigate, think, and think again. And then take a decision based on these facts for yourselves and for your family, based on your own convictions. Also, I will try to kind of translate the data in the peer-review-based scientific publications that all are acknowledged and checked by other scientists in the field. And I will try to translate these papers into your own reality. What does it mean for you here in Denmark when scientists in their laboratories demonstrate serious effects in molecules, cells, bacteria, plants, insects, mammals, and in humans from artificial electromagnetic fields? Today, we should discuss something which the Steiner School and the Steiner Daycare Center in the town of Bærum in Norway a few months ago has decided not to welcome in their premises. And I'm talking about the wireless society, with all the radiation coming from various gadgets, interconnecting them, making them, of course, useful, but in a wireless fashion, using microwaves and other electromagnetic fields. And this school in Norway, they instead have determined to make their school a wireless-free zone. And I just heard before the start that there are at least one such school here in Denmark as well. Today, we shall discuss something which the insurance companies around the world, including Lloyd's in the UK and Reassurance in Switzerland, refuse to take responsibility for. Among such items, you do not only find health effects of electromagnetic fields, but also, as you probably already know, health effects of gene-modified organisms, health effects of nanotechnology, and so on. Is it not very strange? They are all sold to us as 100% risk-free and completely safe, and then they should be safe to insure. But the insurance companies, very early, I was at a meeting, for instance, in London, 2004, they completely refuse to come close to the health effects of the modern electromagnetic society. That is very telling, at least for a scientist and a normal person, and I believe it's also for you. Today we shall discuss something which the telecom manufacturers and operators also completely and totally refuse liability for. Their products are safe, so they claim, but they do not legally touch them even with a barge pole or a pair of pliers. So in a sense, these companies have their own precautionary principle. And oddly enough, it's very often found out that the families of the high-ranking CEOs of these companies, they do not use the gadgets that their father or mother sell to the children and grown-ups in the rest of the world. They stay themselves away from them. Today we should discuss something which the telecom manufacturers, for health safety reasons, tell you to keep at least 1 inch away from your body. If this is a mobile phone, it should be at least 1 inch away from your body. And they are also applied for technical patents based on cancer risks. And it's very interesting because if you think for a moment, when you buy a wireless gadget such as a mobile phone or a decked telephone or a tablet, and you should keep it 1 inch away from your body, you can never, ever touch it. And that means that they have legally secured themselves. If you will get some health effects like cancer, for instance, you go to a court of law, the first thing the manufacturer's lawyers will ask you, did you hold the mobile phone in your right hand or in your left hand? And you maybe say, oh, I used my right hand. And then they will say, you couldn't. You should keep it 1 inch away from your body. You are smoked. You are screwed as consumers. You have to realize that. Today, we should discuss something which the radiation protection authorities around the world say is completely and totally safe. Here in Denmark, in Sweden, and everywhere. But for safety reasons, they still suggest that we shall use it as little as possible, and we should use a hands-free device. Again, it's odd. For a scientist, either a gadget, a thing, is safe or it's not. There is no way in between. But for the radiation safety authorities, there is something in between, also very telling. We should discuss today something which the radiation protection authorities around the world says, and I quote, it gives off very weak radiation, in spite of the fact that a single mobile phone to your head has a magnetic field equal to lifting several electric train engines to your head. In Sweden, electric train engines are the highest exposure factors in occupational issues. And no one would like to sleep next to an electric train engine, but you do. Today we shall discuss something which the radiation protection authorities around the world says, and I quote, gives off very weak radiation, in spite of the fact that the current allowed public microwave exposure levels, as compared to natural background, are 1 million times higher. That's a 1 with 18 zeros higher. Such figures are called astronomical or biblical exposure levels. They are not called in science very weak radiation. There has never been any such exposure increases ever on this planet. And often, as you know, from one day to the other, suddenly a mast system is erected somewhere, it's put on, and from that second, people are showered with biblical exposure levels. And I'm more surprised that people just doesn't understand this and very early said, hey, we just cannot do this. We just cannot expose the public domain in that way. Today we should discuss something which the educational authorities claim to revolutionize teaching and learning in our schools, in spite of the fact that they have been used for years in, for instance, Sweden, parallel to an enormous drop in pedagogic quality and learning capacity. You probably have read about this PISA investigation showing Sweden and other countries plummeting downwards in learning capacity and teaching quality. And this has been brought up in the recent election debate many times in the public service, radio, TV, newspapers, etc. So for me as a scientist, you know, it's hard to impress a scientist. And these gadgets doesn't at all impress me from a pedagogic point of view. Today we should discuss something which easily penetrates walls, floors, ceilings, and you. And while penetrating you, it feeds you with biblical levels of energy into your body, making molecules break, changing the behavior and molecular machinery of your cells, damaging cells all the way to cell death, and feeding cell growth. All of this being shown in peer-review-based scientific studies. Today we should discuss something which lacks any form of biologically based exposure standard or hygienic safety levels. Instead, the safety of these gadgets, of a mobile phone for instance, are determined using so-called technical recommendations based on acute heating in fluid-filled plastic dolls. Not even Swedes are fluid-filled plastic dolls. So my question to you here, these recommendations, do they really make you feel safe? No, of course not. Remember that today we will discuss toys, not life necessities such as clean water, clean air, food that can be eaten without risk, care, concern, love, and respect. Children, for instance, who do not get these necessities of life will perish. Children who do not have e-readers, tablets, mobile phones, still will mature to responsible and loving citizens. That you do not need to worry about. I'm very impressed that you have these kind of open mind conferences. As I say, I'm a normal person, and I work at a place called the Karolinska Institute, where we are pretty normal, all of us, you know. And that means that we have pretty closed minds. For instance, health effects of electromagnetic fields just doesn't exist at all. All fields and rays are said to be safe, but one thing you very quickly find out, and I have found it out the very, very, very hard way, is that it's very unsafe and unwise to try to investigate these artificial radiations from all these gadgets, such as tablets, wireless internet, mobile phones, computer screens, power lines, baby monitors, and PlayStations. Then your career will just go down the drain. So I tell you, don't even think about entering this field. It will cost too much. The funny thing is, if the electromagnetic fields would have been a medicine or a food item under construction or invention or development, it would never have reached you as consumers, because the radiation from these gadgets have been shown to be genotoxic. And that means that electromagnetic fields are a genuine environmental toxin, and such are not any longer allowed to be sold to the general public. But with one exception, these gadgets. I say that we need to have a problem-solving attack on these using safety checklists. Someone is trying to call us here, but I don't know who. Just as an airline pilot would use a safety checklist, we should have the same in society before launching these kind of equipments. And I say again, just by entering the first line with genotoxicity, it would just cross them out from being sold. There are, of course, huge conflicts of interest here. Politics, bank and finance, manufacturers, operators, they are based on greed instead of need. And you as consumers, you just, oh, was it so simple? Oh, sorry, there you are, thank you. And you as consumers and general public actually just accept this. Maybe not you that are in this room, but all the others. If you could go backwards. There. And that I don't think you should. These gadgets impair learning and alters moral conception and reduces the belief in moral judgments. They affect fertility in a very scary way. And I say that we need a truth commission. Facts need to be put on the table in a truth commission way. I say that we need to establish who is actually responsible for this 24/7 human whole body experiment. And we need clear liability contracts. I have tried to get people to sign such liability contracts, but I have failed. No one wants to do that, and as you saw a few moments ago, for instance, the manufacturers, the operators, and the insurance companies just completely refuse to take any responsibility. I say we need a court of inquiry before the catastrophe, and it should be a casualty task force, like after a big airplane crash or something similar. You can just leave it. I touch it if it starts beeping again, you know.
Yeah,
so.
But we have a problem up there.
Oh, yeah. It's later on.
Yeah. You can just talk.
Yeah. I say we need what I have asked for many, many times. I want to inaugurate, to start an Institute for Common Sense. I think there should be a Nobel Prize. I think there should be a Nobel Prize in common sense. That is what we are lacking. And as Frank so elegantly pointed out, there is very high time for mankind to change track. We're heading towards a number of big issues. We are watching them on television, but honestly, are we really doing very much about it? No. I say that we need a completely transparent scientific system based only on need and never ever on career, profit, or similar things. You know, I come from a governmental authority called the Karolinska Institute. It's very famous for handing out the Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology. And it's paid for by the state. That means the taxpayers. And I think that can never, ever be misunderstood. People like you have employed me for their needs, not because I should do any particular career or anything like that. And I think we need to change it. I say we must have a moratorium now. As you can see, when you sit out there, I'm old. I will soon be gone. No one will remember me after a few years. But please, remember to act today. You have to act. Not only regarding health effects of electromagnetic fields, but all these other pending issues. Gene-modified organisms, global warming, nanotechnology, the Human Brain Project, and so on. They are bad, they are evil, there is just no need for it at all. It's just what we need is common sense. Today, various wireless devices flood our homes, schools, and other workplaces. This room is flooded with such equipments. And the questions about the radiation are many, and the fact that you have come here today speaks a very clear language. Adults are not at all sure that all this radiation is harmless. They are not at all sure that the wireless technology and the wireless society is without risk. And to this, one can add, and I will later on show a few slides as well, you can add numerous studies and reports, expert statements, overviews, resolutions, and so on, which in summary says there is a strong suspicion of harm. These texts also point out the need to use the so-called precautionary principle, and this even stronger after the World Health Organization has, in the year 2011, classified radiofrequency electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic. And remember that in that classification system, they have one class where they put things that are completely safe, and that's called the class 4. And they didn't. Not even the World Health Organization thinks that electromagnetic fields are safe. You have probably read about the very recent ruling of the Italian Supreme Court that mobiles can cause brain tumors. The very recent announcement of the French Agency for Food, Environmental and Occupational Health and Safety that radiofrequent exposures should be reduced. You have probably heard about the Belgian government that has announced measures to restrict the use of mobile phones by young children, restrict the sales of mobile phones to children under 7 years of age, and it should be banned from shops and also on the internet. And adverts for mobile phones during children's programs on TV, radio, and the internet should also be banned. You have maybe heard about Dr. Marie-Therese Gibson resigning her position at the Tangara School for Girls over her Wi-Fi health worries. You may have read about South Korean experts noticing a surge in teenagers with poor memory. This kind of new dementia causes deterioration in cognitive abilities, more commonly seen in people who have suffered a head injury or psychiatric illness. And experts say that this could very well be due to game consoles and mobile phones for this worrying trend. So, the idea that these techniques would be safe, we can immediately cross out. The question is rather, how big is the risk, and what do we accept regarding costs in terms of healthcare, disability, and premature death? The last part of my lecture, I will turn to some slides, and as you can see, I work at the Department of Neuroscience at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. I also used to uphold a position at the Royal Institute of Technology for a couple of years because I had a PhD student presenting her thesis at that university. Gentlemen, don't let hard work kill your wife. Let electricity do it. This is a very interesting slide because it immediately divides the audience into people having a normal sense of humor and people having a more twisted, sick sense of humor. So, a very rapid experiment. And of course, electricity is everywhere. All these lovely lamps and things we have in here would not have been possible without the electricity. We would be sitting in darkness. And also it helps us a lot. The woman on the slide here, she gets a lot of help cleaning her rooms back at her home. But one thing that maybe wasn't really realized, and early it was found out, that in the United States, Norway, and Sweden, when electricity was introduced on a larger scale at the end of the 19th century, certain persons actually started to claim adverse health effects. Very early in these countries, people popped up saying, I'm not feeling well, after they have introduced electricity where I work or where I live. And there are very detailed, actually, but still anecdotal reports indicating the presence of what we nowadays call electrohypersensitivity, and I will dwell a little bit on that in a few moments. And this was further strengthened by the introduction in the 40s, 50s, and 60s of so-called amateur DX radio. More and more people started to claim adverse health effects of various nature. It could be headaches or flu sensations in the body or itching or pain sensations. One of the very first studies to attract serious health interest was the one by Nancy Wertheimer and Ed Leeper. And it was published in 1979. And to make a long story short, they found an association between power lines, where the electromagnetic fields were stronger, and childhood leukemia. And this is also cancer classified by the World Health Organization, actually 10 years before the radio frequency fields. And now we are back in 2001, where this also is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization. And in this particular field, I never hear any discussions really. People have sort of settled with the notion that there is such an association. To talk a little bit about electrohypersensitivity, and I know you have an ongoing debate here in Denmark as well, and in Norway and so on. In Sweden, it is officially recognized as a functional impairment. That means it's not a disease. And this happened already in the year 2000. Also, its symptoms, they are classified as an occupationally related symptom-based diagnosis, also the very same year. And this is very interesting, because having been recognized by the Swedish government as a functional impairment, that means that they have the same status in all countries having signed the documents from the United Nations. Denmark, for instance. So people with the electrohypersensitivity are functionally impaired. And if this is a new term for you, it used to be called disabled, and before that, handicapped. But these two terms have been changed into the more modern functional impairment. And the definition of functional impairment is a little bit like when I go to Denmark, with all due respect, I sometimes find it very hard to understand Danish. And that means that I will be functionally impaired. Thus, every human being on this planet, during his or her life, will many, many times be functionally impaired. Not to knowing Danish is not a disease. It's just an impairment. And for that, I need assistance, and I would like to extend a great thank you to all you lovely people who has helped me yesterday and today, and hopefully tomorrow too, so I will get back to Sweden. The electrohypersensitive people in Sweden, they have their own handicap organization, the Swedish Association for the Electrohypersensitive, and it's included in the Swedish Disability Federation. And Swedish municipalities, they just follow the UN 22 standard rules on the equalization of opportunities for people with disabilities, which 2007 was upgraded into a convention called the UN Convention on Human Rights for persons with functional impairments. And this is a set of texts, laws, regulations that are extremely powerful and very, sorry, my wallet is on the other side. Is it all right? Yeah, sorry. It just contains Swedish money, by the way. So. And this convention is extremely powerful because this is the highest legal level on this planet. You can never go above a UN convention. And it regulates our everyday life in all the UN countries. And most countries are members of the United Nations. And actually, these texts are also extremely intelligent and very simple. And it says people with functional impairments, like electrohypersensitivity, are entitled to have an equal life in a society based on equality. That's all. But just watching recently a program about your Danish queen, I realized, no, you don't have any equality in Denmark. Her yearly income is somewhat higher than yours. So you have to work on it a little bit, but you will get there eventually. And to achieve this, the most important principle is the one about complete accessibility. And that means that every public domain must be fully accessible. And this room, for instance, for a person with electrohypersensitivity is not accessible. It's too much in here. So we all need to file a complaint to the United Nations. Because even if you are not electrohypersensitive, even if you are not functionally impaired, we are obliged to always report such complaints to the UN. So go home, write, and send. In Sweden, as in most other countries, impairments are viewed from the point of the environment. No human being is in itself impaired. There are instead shortcomings in the environment that cause the impairment. Thus, it is the environment that should be treated. And for people with electrohypersensitivity, such treatments of the environment could be, for instance, shielding, removal, distance, etc. And in Sweden, we have an action plan for persons with impairments, and it came already in 1999/2000, and the title of it is so fantastic. It says, From Patient to Citizen. That was the end of the view that people with functional impairments were ill, sick, or had a disease. They are just citizens. So it's nothing wrong with a person with electrohypersensitivity from that point of view. It's the environment that needs to be made fully accessible. It's like with me and Danish. I don't have a disease. I just need an accessibility measure. And in my case, the easiest is to have a personal assistant. And I had that yesterday and today. Someone helping me to overcome the obstacles very effectively. I heard that people in this room have had to move from their homes, changing school and so on. And if you go to the United Nations texts, to force a person to quit one's employment or to move from one's home is a serious legal violation. It's just completely forbidden. And the same goes for children. You are not allowed to discriminate them from their educational rights. Never. Their environment should just be fixed, organized, made accessible. But again, I hear that sometimes authorities, municipalities, and so on, doesn't really understand this. And then you should file a complaint. Don't be silent, always file a complaint. You can take the back side of a cardboard box and a pencil and write and put a stamp on and send. That's enough. Just do it. Don't sit and swallow, just do it. So, in essence, persons with a functional impairment electrohypersensitivity shall just enjoy their human rights. Nothing more, nothing less. I have often asked people if they are prepared to give up even a small, tiny part of their human rights. No one has said yes to that. Not even people from the telecom industry, or the power line industry, or any other industrial event. No bank person or finance expert or politician says, oh yeah, I could give up a small part of that. But many of them think that at least people with electrohypersensitivity should do it, but don't. Because, just think for a moment, if your loved ones had electrohypersensitivity, what would you then want from your country? Do not ask what you can do for your country, ask instead what your country can do for you. Because that's what the United Nations texts are telling you. Let that sink in. You are so valuable. You are so important. No one is more important than the other. No one is more valuable than the other. But you are so valuable and so important. Feel that. When you go out in society, be proud. Well, I will quickly run through a few slides. I don't want to keep you glued to your seats too long, but I will just show you a few examples of the kind of research that I've been talking about. And we could start here. This is from the 1980s. You were not even born then. But then we were active, we were doing experiments, and we were investigating persons with electrohypersensitivity. At that time, it was called in Swedish bildskärmsskada, in English screen dermatitis. People sitting in front of computer screens of the old cathode ray tubes, they got skin problems, skin irritations, redness, papules, pustules, and so on. And we took skin biopsies and looked in the microscope using different staining technologies which can reveal cell types and or molecular subtypes. And in this case, we have stained for the presence of a cell type called the dendritic cells. And what you see here is the uppermost part of the skin, called epidermis in English, överhud in Swedish. And below this epidermis, you see the rest called dermis, or in Swedish, läderhud. And in the basal part here, you see these dendritic cells, but also down in the dermis. And the thing is that the person with electrohypersensitivity has a dramatic increase of these cells. There is so very many of them there. And I remember, at that time, you have to remember, we were complete amateurs. And I remember I had this photograph on paper on a table, and a colleague entered the room and said, you are looking on patients with strong immune reactions. How do you know that? I said. Oh, that you can see here. You know, normally there should be a single such cells. There is an enormous activation of the immune system. And you know, the immune system, it's the outermost portion of yourself towards the environment. And it reacts to environmental whatever, toxins or factors that will stimulate the immune system. It could be pollen, nickel, and so on. But in this case, it was just electromagnetic fields. And many persons with electrohypersensitivity, in their initial phases, they complain of flu-like symptoms. You know, when you feel very achy and stiff in your body, and the joints are aching and so on. And maybe this is the microscopic image of that. When we put such a person in front of a normal household television set, after some time, we could see that these cells had seemingly disappeared. And you have to trust me. At that time, I say we were amateurs, and particularly I was a complete jerk, you know. So I told my younger collaborators that no way, you must have done something wrong. You have to repeat this experiment. There is no way all these cells just could have disappeared. And they muttered something behind my back, went back and did the experiment once more, but the outcome was exactly the same. After the provocation, the number of these cells had gone down practically to zero. They were just gone. And if I hadn't been such an amateur, I would have known that this is exactly what happens with you in a few months' time. You know, we are entering the autumn, the winter, but then the spring is coming, and we stand there on our lunch break in the sun, and it's so lovely. After the long winter, it's so lovely. In the afternoon, you feel, wow, I feel a little warm, maybe a little bit reddish. And if you would take a biopsy then, this has happened. Because these cells will leave the skin and go to immune competent organs in your body, like lymph nodes, telling them that, hey, here we go again. The person is out on the stairs, exposing himself or herself to a very dangerous radiation source, namely the sun. And then signals go back to the skin, telling the skin to build pigment. And in a few days' time, you will get a suntan. And that's a post-inflammatory reaction to radiation. Simple. It has been studied at the Karolinska Hospital just across the road from me, so I should have really known, but I didn't. Here we didn't allow them to go out in the sun, and since this was done in December in Stockholm, there just wasn't any sun, by the way. So that's not the culprit, but the culprit here is the electromagnetic fields from the television set. In another experiment, we instead investigated the so-called mast cells, and mast cells has nothing to do with telecom masts. They're called so because they are thick and swollen. They contain agents such as histamine and heparin, and when they are released, you get the classical allergic reactions. Any asthmatic or allergic patient would know very precisely what I'm talking about. And in normal healthy volunteers, you have again a microscopic image with the with the epidermis. Something is going on. See if we can come back there. Sorry for that. What you can see here are bright dots. In the normal healthy volunteer, these are the mast cells. This is a typical normal image. Or actually, it's not very typical nowadays, because the number of mast cells in the normal healthy population is slowly rising. So in textbooks in medicine, they have to be rewritten now and then, because the baseline constantly goes up, also saying that something is wrong in the society. But nevertheless, if you compare with a person with electrohypersensitivity, you see an enormous increase. And if I back one slide, no, I couldn't. There. You remember this image. This is a classical textbook image of a so-called radiation damage. In this case, from sun. The next one is also a textbook image of a radiation damage, but this you would see if you expose people to things like plutonium and uranium, X-ray, and strong ultraviolet light and radar rays. But these are just persons with electrohypersensitivity, but their body has reacted in the very same way. So from this moment on, and now we are at 1992, then we formed as a working hypothesis, people with electrohypersensitivity just have a radiation damage. It's nothing particular, it's nothing strange, it's nothing new. It's really in the textbook already, but the sources have been different before. Now we have a new source, namely computer screens, television sets, mobile phones, DECT phones, baby alarms, PlayStations, etc. But the reaction will be exactly the same. So from that moment on, we have used that as a working hypothesis. Finally, regarding the mast cells here, if you just look on these two panels, the same again, you have the epidermis and the dermis. Each dot is a mast cell. This is a normal healthy volunteer, and this is the same person 2 hours after being exposed from the computer screens and television sets. And here, the normal healthy volunteers, they were actually students. They were sitting with their back towards the computers and televisions, and after 8 hours they were released. But we took biopsies now and then to follow what happened. And no one reported any health issues at all. We were asking them if it felt hot or itching or pain or anything. No one felt anything. A few of the students reported that they felt it was boring to sit with their back to computers. Well, they have to report everything. But that was the only thing, you know. But when we took biopsies, their skin had reacted as if they would have been sitting with their back to plutonium, X-ray, or ultraviolet light or radar. And it was just computer screens and television screens. So the reaction pattern, the very same. It took a longer time to get such an image from plutonium. It takes a few seconds. But here it took approximately 2 hours. But they didn't feel anything. So it's interesting. Our idea is that everyone is nowadays activated. This is also part of the immune system, which also would explain why this student, already at the beginning, compared to an image from the 1950s, they just have too many mast cells. And you know, at least in Sweden, that allergies, asthmas, and so on have exploded. And now it's approximately 50–55% of the young population, and of the whole population, it's more than 1/3. In the 50s, it was less than 0.5%. So it's an enormous increase in allergies and asthmas. Maybe this could have something to do with it. Other scientists have also shown that, for instance, lymphocytes, a cell type that is also part of the immune system, in parallel get comparable responses both in healthy volunteers and in hypersensitive donors. So maybe not only the persons with electrohypersensitivity are at stake, but everyone is. Very interesting investigation. Peter French and his colleague Charles Harvey, they have done studies regarding these mast cells. But instead of taking biopsies from human beings, they have cultured them in plastic vials and having so-called cell cultures. And to make a long story short, in Australia, mast cells in cell cultures, they do not like to call in mobile phones. They react as if they would have been exposed to a classic allergen such as nickel or pollen. So it kind of gets another piece of the jigsaw puzzle, that these cells, they do not like this. And I think we should listen to these cells, because when you scrutinize the scientific databases, you will find that today there are many thousands of peer-review-based scientific publications not speaking in favor of the wireless society. On the contrary, some of the findings are appalling. They may make you scream. They make me, at least, not sleep in the nights. So it's really a big human experiment going on, and you are the guinea pigs. A colleague to me, Hajime Kimata, he's a clinical dermatologist. He has made some extremely interesting observations, because he took allergic patients and exposed their allergy rashes to mobile phone radiation, and then they got worse. And he could also see that not only did the mobile phone radiation enhance allergen-induced wheal responses, but he could also follow this in blood tests regarding the release of such markers as substance P and vasoactive intestinal polypeptide. So patients with an allergy, they do get worse when they are exposed to this kind of radiation. I got very enthusiastic about this, and I remember I called him and talked with him over the phone and said, hey, you just have to come here to the Karolinska Institute. There are so many studies we must do. This is extremely important to pursue. But he said he just couldn't. His boss didn't allow him to leave Japan and his clinical position and so on. He had his family, etc. And I was, of course, sad about that. But at the same time, I was happy because we didn't have any money. So I don't know why he should have come at all. It's so very, very difficult to get money to do these kind of studies, which in a way is also telling. It looks as if someone has said that you can investigate over there these things, but not these issues, which I find scaring, I would say. Of course, when we talk about human beings, they may be influenced by other factors. We have talked about electromagnetic fields, allergy, light sensitivity. There could be chemical factors. But then you have the whole psychological piece of this cake regarding this person's personality, so-called coping phenomena. Maybe he or she doesn't like her boss, or the work task is too stressful, or the machine is jamming all the time, or something is not good. And that we have to understand and always have in our so-called controlled studies. And when we talk about persons with electrohypersensitivity, as you know, the explanations or the explanatory models from the very beginning was that no, there are no such effects from electromagnetic fields. These persons just imagine that they get harm from computer screens. And it's possibly because they are women. They have postmenopausal problems. It's hard to cope with their new life. The children has left their home. The husband has a new mistress, and they don't feel happy any longer. But then there were men starting to come. So then one said, no, sorry, we didn't mean that. We meant it's the persons with a low education, because they do not understand all these new machines, and they get stressed. And then they believe they have an electrohypersensitivity. And then there came lawyers, professors, high-ranking military officers, high-ranking CEOs in the industry, film stars, rock stars, and so on. And then people suddenly say, no, we meant the opposite. This is actually the persons with a high education, because they want so much. And when they are not able to produce all these fantastic things they have in their mind, they get stressed, and then they think they're electrohypersensitive. And the sort of most glorious model of them all, you hear they are not models. This is just superstition. This has nothing to do with the dull, boring science, you know. It's so easy to investigate this. But one model that was very interesting was that it's a mass media-driven psychosis. When journals, magazines, newspapers, tabloids, radio, television writes, speaks, talks about this, then people start to feel things. Maybe I'm electrohypersensitive too. And you get a mass media-driven psychosis. It's not uncommon. Mass media is often used to drive you in certain directions, actually every day. So that's a very powerful tool, extremely powerful tool. The person who really realized that was a German called Joseph Goebbels, but that's another story. So that's a possibility, but it's so easily solved. You just use rats. Rats do not read newspapers, they do not listen to radio, they do not watch television, and still, in controlled experiments, they are badly harmed of human-produced electromagnetic fields at exposure levels that you are sitting in right now. And they don't have any postmenopausal problems with mistresses and children and so on, you know. They are not educated, they are super smart. You can never beat these guys, you know. If you don't have what I have back home, and it's not my wife, I'm thinking about our 5 cats. They beat them. You know, the wireless society, and particularly mobile phones and such gadgets, has been an extremely sweet piece of candy for Sweden. We have had for many years Ericsson, and our neighboring country used to be called Finland, but nowadays called Nokialand. They have had Nokia Consumer Electronics with all its subdivisions, and it has produced an enormous wealth for Sweden and Finland. So it has really been wonderful. Everyone has had a big asset from it. But as you know, when you eat candy, after a few pieces, it gets a little bit overwhelming. It's a little bit too much. It's a little bit too sweet. And that was exactly what happened in Sweden too. Very early, guys like this one, already in 1995, had written a number of debate articles asking simple questions such as, how dangerous are the mobile phones actually? And in these articles, people like myself, we put very simple questions, but there never seemed to be anyone able to produce any answers. And one of my favorite questions, which I've sent to the Swedish government, is, please, I know you say it's safe, so can you please send the documentation showing it is safe? So far, I have received nothing. After all these years, all these letters to all these ministers, to all these persons, I have received nothing. And Jesus Christ, they are employed by us. It's a really transparent democratic system. They have to send all the documentation, but they just don't have it. And as the famous ABBA song, they just take a chance on us. They hope it's safe. And if it's not, they have probably retired by the time when the shit hits the fan, you know. And in 1983, and you see time is flying, I say again, you were not even born then, you know. I coined an expression that other scientists have used a lot. I said that this is the largest full-scale experiment ever. What happens when we, 24 hours around the clock, wherever we are, allow ourselves and our children to be used as guinea pigs, whole body irradiated for the rest of our lives. And I repeated it, 1985, 89, 92, and now it's 2014. I'm running out of space, as you see here. I have to do something about this slide. For each year added, the space is decreasing. And 1994, Expressen, one of the tabloids in Sweden, thought that this would be the Christmas gift of the year, question mark. But no way. I mean, to give a child such a very strong radiation emitter, it's not very wise at all. Others point to the radiation protection authorities. This is from Norway, and it says in Norwegian, Strålevernet har sviktet. The radiation protection authority has not done their job properly. And very often it seems as if these authorities protect the radiation instead of the citizens, which is completely in contrast to what they should do and what we believe they are doing. And in Sweden, I don't know for Norway and Denmark, but in Sweden, the Radiation Protection Authority has been infested by representatives from the telecom industry. That is not the way it should be. But they just do it openly. They don't even try to hide it. They do publications together. But they shouldn't. These authorities should stand free from the sectors of the industry they are supposed to control. But in Sweden they are not. And I hear similar things happening in other parts of the world. In other places, and this is from the Northern Ireland, people, they are more aggressive than Scandinavians. So here they just took down one of these huge masts. They got pissed and said, no more. You should not radiate our children any longer. Well, you shouldn't applaud really, because this is not the way it should be done. I mean, we live in democracies with a representative power. We should just write to our municipality civil servants, to the politicians, to the ministers, and so on, and they will fix it. Or when we talk about mobile telephony and the microwaves and so on, in the public mind, most people then think about cancer. And cancer is, don't get me wrong, it's very important and so on, but from a scientific point of view, it's not the most important as it stands today. The most important, I would say, it's probably the effect on DNA and DNA fragmentation. First shown by Henry Lai and Narendra Singh in their very famous 1996 paper, which you see here. Such fragmentation could cause loss of fertility, impairment of the immune system, debilitation of the cancer defense, and predict genetic damage to future generations. Again, all of this has already been shown. I do not sleep well in nights. This is just horrifying to read these papers, you know. And with getting on for 4.5 to 5 billion mobile phone users, their cumulative effect threatens the entire genome. And don't get me wrong, it's not only humans that are at stake. Every living creature on this planet are right now. Every bacteria, every insect, every plant, every bird, every dog, cat, and so on. They're all exposed everywhere, you know. There are few places left which is not exposed 24/7. When Lion Singh produced their revolutionary studies, immediately they were accused of being amateurs, and they had done things wrong, and blah, 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 all of that, And people were harassing them and bullying them and slandering them in public. And eventually it was decided by the telecom industry that they would repeat the study of LineID. They gave 12 European laboratories in 7 countries money, enormous amounts of money. They got equipment, personnel, cells, chemicals, everything to replicate. And it was done very nicely, very controlled, double-blind, perfect. And eventually, the study was finished, and it's called the reflex study. And when these double-blind codes were broken and the results revealed, do you know what had happened? These laboratories had proven LineID right. Do you think that the telecom industry went to a bizarre length trying to stop the publication of this study? Yes, but they couldn't. Eventually it was published. And what was shown was that here you have a so-called Comet Assay, a very simple tool actually, but very powerful. And here you are sham-exposed DNA from cells as an internal control to show that the whole experiment actually works. They have been irradiated with radioactivity, so-called gamma rays, and then it forms a tail of small broken pieces of DNA, and therefore it's called the Comet Assay, because comets, as you know, they have a tail on the night sky, and this is shown here. And the amount of radiation used here, gamma rays, is equal to 1,600 chest X-rays. There are no patients that has received 1,600 X-rays, of course, but it equals the same amount. But look, 24-hour mobile phone radiation at an exposure level which is below the recommendation. The official recommendation is 2 watts per kilogram. Produces exactly the same type of tail as 1,600 X-ray examinations. I can understand why the telecom industry went to such bizarre length to stop it. But they couldn't. And then I also understand that their very intelligent lawyers said, we will fix that. Just write in the thick book you get when you buy a phone that you have to keep it away 1 inch from your body. The moment they touch it, they are screwed. So they solved the problem that way. So I think it will be hard to legally provoke them into a corner, but people are trying, very much so still. I should also say that this effect on the DNA is cumulative, meaning the more you live in such an environment, the more damage your DNA will have. And remember that this was just 24 hours of mobile phone radiation. And you have lived years and years and years in such exposure levels. So of course, it's interesting to ask oneself what will happen with the genomic material on this planet. Sorry. And more studies regarding cumulative effects are important. One thing you should also remember is that I mentioned that the official guideline or recommendation is 2 watts per kilogram, but most studies that are showing effects, they are below, or very much below, or extremely much below this. So this 2 watts per kilogram value is not protecting you at all. And that was found out very early by scientists like myself, that it's just a technical recommendation and nothing else. And here you can see, for instance, the effects on DNA, but also other effects on eating, drinking, calcium, fluxes, the EEG, the electric activity of the brain, and so on. There are so many papers. And if you would like to read a short summary of approximately 4,000 papers, I recommend you to go to the Bioinitiative report, which is on the internet. It's just 4,000 papers. If it should be safe to use these gadgets, all these scientific papers must be wrong. That has never happened in science. The probability for these papers to be wrong is just zero. There is no such probability. I have been around this planet, I don't know how many times, and I've been giving lectures and so on. And during that time, people have, like you, started to listen. In the beginning, there were very few. There were mostly people with electron hypersensitivity and their relatives. But more and more normal, healthy volunteers, normal people, as Frank called them, they started to listen as well. And here is very interesting. Just an example. We were invited in Italy to a municipality called Benevento, and the city of Benevento, who gave all the money to hold the meeting with, 30, 40, 50 scientists, and the top scientists. And this was in February in 2006. And at that meeting, I said, because there had been internet-based resolutions, Catania resolution, for instance, but unfortunately, in my part of the world, and in politics and finance and industry, the internet doesn't count at all. If you write anything there, you can just flush it down the toilet. It's simpler and faster. No one gives a toss about it, And therefore I said, the next resolution we write, because people wanted to write the resolution here, we should publish it in a peer-review-based scientific journal. Then it will be read. And scientists said, no journal would publish such a text. And I said, no, you're wrong. They will. And particularly if we can put some scientific pressure behind it. And we wrote the Benevento resolution. It is published in a scientific journal, and there are a lot of bullet points, and one of them says that arguments that weak electromagnetic fields cannot affect biological systems do not represent the current spectrum of scientific opinion. We said that we need to adopt a framework of guidelines for public and occupational exposure, and it should reflect the precautionary principle. Better to be safe than sorry. We said that we must inform the population of the potential risks. I must stop there, because sometimes I get really angry, I must say. Very non-Swedish way of behavior I have sometimes. And here I always get frustrated, because where I work, the Karolinska Institute, it's a governmental authorities, and it has three main aims. It should do research, it should teach students to become doctors, dentists, ophthalmologists, and so on. And the third is to be part of the society, informing the society, taking part of discussions, being in television, radio, in newspapers, and so on. And I have been a lot. And it has been a very interesting journey, but the backside is that I often hear, not directly in my face, but behind my back, that colleagues to me say, Olle Johansson is not a real scientist because he talks with the general public. I have to hold on to the table. That's the whole essence of a democracy. We should all talk with each other. I'm employed by you, or rather the Swedish taxpayers, but nevertheless. And I should, of course, inform them. And since we are part of the European Union, I should inform you too. And since we are part of the United Nations, I should inform everyone on this planet. There I get a little bit angry when I think about that. But we should inform the population. We should limit cell phone use and cordless phone use by young children and teenagers, and ban telecom companies from marketing to them. And as I mentioned before, like in Belgium, they have taken this to their heart and really tried to decrease this marketing. At that meeting in Benevento, 2006, another thing came up. I said that, there are a lot of official reports from radiation protection authorities and so on, but they are very skewed. They have filtered away the important studies and based their assumptions on the non-important or non-interesting studies. We should do our own compilation of the science. And people felt very enthusiastic about it, but it boiled down to we had to do it ourselves. And we then started out, and we could only work for 9 months. We didn't have a single dollar, nothing. We had to do it in our free time, in weekends, evenings, and after 9 months, myself and others said, no, we cannot go on any longer. We must do other things in our life, you know. But we had by then compiled approximately 600 pages and 2,000 scientific reports, which formed the Bioinitiative report. And it boils down to the title, A Rationale for a Biologically Based Public Exposure Standard for Electromagnetic Fields in the ELF and RF range. And I'm sitting here at the restaurant in Stockholm at the Karolinska Institute. And you probably see that this is a Nobel laureate sitting there on a painting. And here's me, and this is Cindy Sage, the secretary of the Bioinitiative report. You know, when you produce 600 pages, you don't think anyone will read it. But people did. And one group that really read it was the European Parliament. And they used it the year after. This was presented August 31st, 2007. And the year after, September 4, the European Parliament voted 522 to 16 to recommend tighter safety standards for cell phones. And they said that the limits on exposure to electromagnetic fields, which have been set for the general public, are obsolete. And if there's someone here from the English-speaking part of the world, you know that the word obsolete is extremely strong. So they just said, these recommendations we just cannot have. And they also said that they were greatly concerned at the Bioinitiative International Report concerning electromagnetic fields, and which points to its conclusions to the health risk posed by emissions from, as you can see, all types of gadgets, not only mobile telephony, but Wi-Fi, WiMAX, Bluetooth, DECT, landline telephones, blah, blah, all of it, you know. So they included all these gadgets together. What happened then? Well, that was also interesting. The telecom industry said, this is good. This is a very good idea. But this group of scientists cannot do this new compilation. We, the telecom industry, will do it instead. Well, after that, after the report was presented in August 31st, 2007, I remember September 1st, the very day after, when I came to my work, there were already 3 new scientific papers that should have been in that report. But we had to stop. And I will just quickly show you that after that, scientists have shown that use of cell phones decrease the semen quality in men, by decreasing the sperm count, motility, viability, and normal morphology. And as you know, in Europe, for instance, all countries, the quality of male sperm cells are going like this. Maybe this is one of the factors behind that reduction in quality. Another study from Greece pointed to that if we wait generation after generation, it will end in complete, irreversible infertility. If we translate that to Denmark, that will mean, with this time scale, that in around 150 to 200 years' time, Danes can no longer produce Danish babies because of something we did this year, or actually some years before this year. And then it's very late to say, oh, sorry, we must turn it off. We will call back to 2014. It's just too late, you know. If you expose pregnant women and their babies, then it turns out that the babies' hearts get stressed. And that you can see by viewing heart rate, fetal and neonatal heart rate, which is increased, and the cardiac output, which is decreased, meaning that their hearts go faster but more shallow. And I usually ask parents, do you want your babies to be cardiacally stressed? And no mother and father says, yes, that's what we would like to have. Finally, you also see that plants, in this case tomato plants, when they are exposed, and in this case to base station radiation, the kind of radiation you sit in right now, their cells strongly reacts. And Alain Vion, one of the scientists behind this, he said to me that it was as if they would have crushed these plants with a hammer. The cells started to secrete damage sequence molecules such as calmodulin. If you crush a plant, it will send such molecules. And they didn't touch them. They just allowed them to be irradiated from base station mobile telephony exposure, and they reacted in the very same way. Rats have shown retarded learning. Oh, sorry.
The timekeeper.
It says 11:57 here.
Yeah, but this is the countdown.
Oh, sorry, very good. Sorry. No, that's perfect. What the service said 12:23. No, it's perfect. Rats showed retarded learning with a decrease in concentration capacity and a decrease in short-term memory. By gadgets that you give your children to have every fucking day. I thought that Danish school children should take over the world, not to have a decreased concentration capacity and a decreased short-term memory. And trust me, rats and small babies are not different. They react exactly the same in this case. And of course, when you do experiments using, in this case, young boys, they do get alterations associated with attentional resources, meaning that they have a reduced learning capacity in this educational task system. Well-controlled, double-blind, blah, 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 blah. Students do less good when they have been irradiated. Why doesn't, for instance, the Swedish Minister of Education react? I have sent all of this to him. I never get any response. No, on the contrary, they want in Sweden, maybe here too, to have more gadgets, more computers, more tablets, more things, more radiation, more routers in the schools. Couldn't we please start the Institute of Common Sense? we should have no such gadgets. And in Sweden, there are actually observations because you can have all these gadgets in a wired shielded form. And there are such schools that are old-fashioned. They have wide shielded computers, for instance. And of course, the information that comes to the students are exactly the same, and they do just as well. There is no difference. They just do as well as the other students. And I then spoke with a woman at what you say in English, the Educational Board of Sweden. And she said that if you look on students and the outcome of the educational quality, the schools in Sweden that seems to do best are schools that traditionally do not use such gadgets very much, like Waldorf Steiner schools, Reggio Emilia, and Montessori schools. Their students seem to behave better, mature better, and learn better. And then she said, but you cannot quote me on that. She was afraid, you know, as a representative of the School Board of Sweden. Breast cancer in women has been discussed a lot, and these type of exposures do not increase the cell division in breast cancer, and they do not initiate breast cancer, but they do something different. Namely, they reduce the efficacy of tamoxifen similar to such resistance. And this is the most common treatment for breast cancer. So the rays from mobile phones and similar gadgets will reduce the efficacy of this treatment, meaning, bluntly, that the women will die anyhow. They didn't get the cancer from the mobile phone, but the mobile phone surely killed them at the very end anyhow. You know, after this Benevento meeting, we wrote a lot of different statements and resolutions and so on. The London one is one such in 2009, and we proposed that children under 16 should use mobile phones and cordless phones only for emergency calls. No Wi-Fi, WiMAX, or other forms of wireless networking are placed in homes, schools, or public areas. Of course, very few listen. But you know, I don't want to die feeling that I could have spoken out. I could have told them the truth. I could have taken responsibility. And I always tell people, everyone, including your queen and so on, every evening when you stand in your bathroom and watch yourself in the bathroom mirror, if you can meet your eyes without turning away your gaze, then you have done a good job. But if you feel ashamed, please go back and redo what you did. That's very important. We're coming to the end, and in Norway, in November 2009, we had an enormous work session for many days, and it ended up in something called the Cle Team Statement, which is also published, because that's the only way to do it. And to make that story short, we showed in that low-intensity, non-thermal bioeffects and adverse health effects are demonstrated at levels significantly below existing standards. The public safety limits are inadequate and obsolete with respect to prolonged low-intensity exposure. New biological-based public exposure standards are urgently needed to protect public health worldwide, and it's not in the public interest to wait. We must do it now. Well, that was published, the Cle Team Statement, in 2010 in an American journal. And then what? Well, as I already mentioned, in 2011, first the Council of Europe said that we have to ban phones and wireless networks in schools. May 31st that year, the World Health Organization classified radio frequent electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic. I said that the Italian Supreme Court ruled in favor of that mobile phones cause cancer in a patient. That was in October. And now we are in September 2014 in Copenhagen. Maybe the answer to all of the things I've said to you and all the things we have discussed is no more full-scale experimentation. Just think for a second. I will twist my fingers, and when I did this, all wireless gadgets in the world have just disappeared now. They're just completely gone. Does that make any real difference? No. No way. You need to go to the toilet, eat, you need to sleep, you need to think, and so on, educate yourself. And interestingly enough, and that has been scientifically studied, if you remove, for instance, mobile phones, then you see a dramatic and quick increase in, what you say in English, in public health, because people start to talk with each other. And the first thing they will say is, you know, it's so funny, I have lost my phone. You see, I had it at my work, and then when I came back from the toilet, it was just gone. And the other will go, oh, that's odd. You see, I've also lost my phone, and by the way, you know the big antenna? It just disappeared. And they will start to communicate, and soon they will talk about important things like children, garden, dogs, cats, food, water, and so on. So it will actually be an asset to a society to lose a lot of these gadgets. And I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying that we should sit around a campfire and drag each other by the hair and so on. That's what I'm not saying, but we need at least to think and reconsider. And just finally, you have to think a little bit about safety. There are, as you know, guideline recommendations. And this guideline you see as number 2, that's what you live in. That's the Danish guideline, 9 million microwatts per square meter of radio-frequent radiation. And then others have either said or indicated reduced levels. And you see, for instance, the Bioinitiative report in the revised, updated version said 3 microwatts per square meter would be all right. But there is only one hygienic safety level ever produced, and it's proposed by myself. And it's this one, because this is the natural background during normal cosmic activities. This is what you lived in before Finland went into Nokia land. And you see, the difference is just astronomical, biblical. And if it's hard to think about, just make it into sound level instead. Just imagine tomorrow the birds in Copenhagen have increased their voice strength by 1 million times. One sparrow could then completely destroy the whole of Denmark. It will just be nothing, sand left of that impact, that sound impact, you know. Probably the whole planet will go to smithereens. So it's odd that we allow these kind of exposures given all the scientific data we have. Recently, in the United States, the Supreme Court updated decision regarding a widow to a smoker. She had been given $2.32 billion as compensation. But the Supreme Court said, no, it's too little. So she now gets $23 billion as a compensation because her husband died from smoking. When I talk with American lawyers, they say that the compensation sums regarding the microwave irradiation will be much larger. They are talking about 100 or several hundred billion dollars per case. And the reason for that is smoking. Initially, we didn't know very much about. No one understood that it was a cancer problem. But for microwave-based issues, we understood this already in the 40s and 50s. We then knew, especially in Sweden, was a huge number of papers published regarding microwaves and the very bad effects it has on the living life. And therefore, it will be summoned to much higher levels of compensation. Well, isn't it fantastic? The last slide and the clock on the very second. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Before we let you go, we have the EHA's representatives which would like to present you with an award.
Oh, yes.
So I would like to call them
Oh.
up on the stage, please.
Oh. This cool. You know, I shouldn't have an award. I just did what I was supposed to do. I did my work, that was all.
You are obviously a very normal man.
Yes, I am. Yes.
But you are an extraordinary man.
Oh.
And I am representative of the electrosensitive people in Denmark,
Yes.
the EHS-foreningen. And we want to give you this award. And we want to announce you a member of honor of our
wow.
association.
Oh, that's a
So here you
fantastic
go.
honor. Thank you so much.
So, thank you.
That it is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, now we're going to have about 15 minutes of question and answer session. I'm going to hand the microphone over to the ones who would like to ask questions. So if I can see your hands. Yeah.
You know, I don't see you. If you can turn off this very strong, thank you, because I don't see the audience otherwise. Maybe you can turn the lights on in the room. So I think there is a man or a woman. I can't see you there.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, I have a question, which is about what we can do to protect ourselves from all of this. Is there anything, in your opinion, that we can eat or drink to protect our bodies from this exposure?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
No. There is no way. And, you know, then we're also entering the wrong avenue, I would say, because we are talking about the public exposure, and we should not be forced to sort of wearing an armor, not on the outside, not on the inside. If it's harmful, which it evidently is, it should just be removed. And as I say, it doesn't mean anything. Your life will not change. It will be somewhat better because you will start to talk with your girlfriend or boyfriend again, you know.
Thank you.
Niels Harrit, Copenhagen. I have a question which goes really to the core of the scientific situation, and that is the why. Is there any understanding in the scientific community as to why there actually is an effect on biological systems by what you most have been talking about, microwaves, but you've been through the whole range of radio frequencies from 50 hertz in the power supply to the power lines, which is 500, 600 hertz. That means we're talking about a whole range of frequencies. And I always wondered, this is actually my field, the scientific field, interaction of electromagnetic radiation with materials. So what is the mechanism of interaction? Is this purely a heat effect of the microwaves, or why does the DNA actually fragment? Has anybody made any experiments in this respect?
this is an extremely important and very good question. We have wanted to do a lot of mechanistic studies, but we have not been able to get the necessary money. But others have done so, and there are pieces, quite a few actually, that points in various directions, and there are various hypotheses, and scientists are right now trying to follow them, but it's too early to formulate any form of unifying theory. And we can spend hours and hours discussing that, because there are very many papers actually regarding effects on ionic channels, frequency-dependent effects, etc., etc., etc. And maybe, for instance, that pure sinus wave 50 Hz fields maybe doesn't interact with us at all, because when studies have been done, it has been done using, for instance, power sources, power lines, etc., which are infested by, for instance, high-frequency fields. And they have not subdivided the effects, so they don't really know. And from a sort of purely radiophysics point of view, maybe we doesn't pick up these 50 Hz fields. The wavelength of them is 6,000 kilometers, you know. So you need a very special antenna to pick them up.
I have a suggestion, actually, because it came to my mind when these studies came out about the cancers in kids living under the power lines.
Yeah.
I wonder how does this is low frequency, 700, 800 hertz. Why do they interact with the tissue?
Yeah, and scientists have been asking the very same questions, and the only sort of detail which came out was that, if you remember, Nancy Wertheimer, she took her very old car and traveled through Denver, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, and looked at these addresses where the children were living. And then she noticed that the houses that were struck by childhood leukemia, that were at the so-called end points of, or end poles of the utility system, where the line turns around and goes back again. And later on, it was discovered that there were higher levels, but she didn't think at all about if there were electromagnetic disturbances in higher frequencies.
So it's a gradient rather than actually
Could be,
the intensity.
yeah, could be.
But how interaction with the membrane potential? It's obvious, it's static, and it would react to low frequency fields.
Yeah, but someone needs to really prove it as well at the scientific level, you know.
Has this been done?
No, not yet.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, there are studies on their way, and it's very interesting to read all these studies, because they subdivide, as I said, into different tracks. And I have formulated, it's very private and very personal idea, that it kind of boils down to the unnecessary addition of energy.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just so simple, you know. We feed all the living organisms with energy, and they do react.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not so very, how do you say, complicated at the very end. But it could be. So,
Appreciate it.
yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah, you should take your
Yes.
chance. I will never come back, as you know. So yeah, I don't have time for that, you know. I have to take one place at the other, you know. So.
My name is Sten Ingwersen. So my question is, has the industry, or is the industry doing anything in order to reduce the irradiation from each mobile phone?
They are, but it has officially nothing to do with health effects. They want to save battery time, so the lower emissions, the longer the time of the battery, the less often you have to recharge it. So that's what they are doing. But still, you know, we are talking about, if you think about the skyscraper that has 1 million stories high, you know, and they are taking off a few thousand of them at the top. And from your point of view, being at the natural level, you cannot even see the top. It's so far away, you know. So it's just a technical measure yet. But legally, they have protected themselves, as I said, you know.
So is it possible to sort of shield the mobile phone so that the user is protected to some extent?
From the actual phone, you can shield by just not using it. just not having one. That's probably the simplest, but not from the background radiation. And I remember 1998, there was I think it was a week of conference in Göteborg in Sweden. It was called Mobile Phones and Health. And then I remember I asked one of the physicists from Chalmers in Göteborg, and I said, we have listened now to the data presented at this conference from professors like Henry Lai and so on. And I said, if we take all the data, 1998, and boil down to your question, how far away from my body do I have to keep the mobile phone to be safe? And then he said like this, from the stage, and I was sitting in the audience, he said, well, you know, it's hard to give an exact figure, but if you keep it away 5 to 10 kilometers, you would be safe. And it's not a joke. I mean, you have to remember there are few radiation emitters that are so strong and could traverse kilometers and tens of kilometers and even more. So it's a very strong torch, actually. And then he said, but of course, even if you have it so far away, apart from having to have very long arms to do the numbering, you know, you cannot escape the base station radiation. And that one in its own is still biblical. We are talking about these massive increases, you know. And don't forget what this man pointed out too, the power frequent levels. A mobile phone, when you have it to your body, equals several of the Danish electric train engines in radiation exposure from ELF fields. So it could be that culprit too, or both.
So what I understand from what you say, that I'm going to tell some of my friends who are using these patches that claim to reduce the radiation on the mobiles, to throw it away along with the telephone itself.
We have tried a lot of these stickers and patches and so on. No one works, apart from one. And it's not a patch or a sticker or anything like that. It's a pouch made of the same material as this woman has around her head, a microwave shielding cloth. And that's basic schoolbook physics. That works. So that you can buy. I think the producer is called Microwaves or something like that. But as you say, the only way to avoid is to throw it away and live somewhere else, out on an island or down in a pit of a mine or something.
We have another question.
Ja, jag hör det ändå.
I will try to do it without this one.
Okay.
I cannot.
Okay, yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. I will ask the why. You ask the why. Why do they get more gadgets, more and more and more, and why doesn't the ministers listen? And my question to you is, have you considered that they themselves, we all, are addicted, physically addicted to microwave?
Yeah. That was
Just because when we put a mobile phone to our brain, our neurotransmitters are, what do you say,
yeah, they are altered. Yeah, affected, yes.
and all these neurotransmitters can produce addiction.
Yeah. You are so very right in this, and that was shown again by the foremost expert in the world, which you really should invite, and that's Henry Lai, of course, from University of Washington in Seattle, the United States. And already in the 1980s, I think it was, he showed exactly what you say, that the transmitter molecules of the central nervous system, including the brain, are altered, and it's exactly those that are altered in phenomena of other types of addiction. Morphine addiction, for instance, or drug addiction in general, alcohol addiction. And people are, of course, very much addicted to these equipments. And that's, I mean, we are leaving, in a way, what I talked about and entering a new area. And it's fascinating to see this. You know, I'm a man, for instance. And when I don't have a car, I've never had that. So I go in the public transportation, in buses and undergrounds. And 30 years ago or 20 years ago, there could be women with a cleavage. And as a man, you want to quickly look down, oh, you know. Nowadays, I could sit for hours because she is occupied with this. I could take snapshots, close-ups, whatever. You know, I could undress and show myself. She won't even notice this, you know. So it's another ballpark. And of course, that means that the fascination is lost. So I read instead. But this is telling us something. And the addiction is very, very obvious. And people, I don't remember the figures, but they are crazy, you know. People will look at their iPhones hundreds of times a day, checking, no, nothing has happened, checking again, and so on. And of course, that reflects, and you will not like me saying this, but most modern people in most modern countries do not have a meaningful life any longer. Their work tasks and so on are completely meaningless. And few are farmers, hunters, diggers, craftsmen, and so on, you know. Most people are doing completely meaningless things, and they are looking for meaning in their life. And that's what they, for a neurobiologist as me, that's what they're doing. And so a gigantic crisis would be good. In Sweden, at our public television, there is a Danish program everyone loves, and it's about a Danish young farmer who uses old-fashioned tools. And people are just glued to it. They talk about it, and as a neuroscientist, I think, oh yeah, they are showing something that you don't see any longer, a meaningful life. Struggling for survival. That's what it's all about, you know. But we don't do that any longer. So we play games. You know, when I took the aircraft, there was a man and a woman, and I tried to be polite, saying that, oh, you are going to Copenhagen, how nice. What? They were playing games, both of them, you know. So.
But what we're talking about now, that's the psychological addiction.
Yeah, but it's a physical addiction as well.
My question is there also a physical?
Yes. In rats, you know, we are not allowed to decapitate human beings and take out their brains. And maybe we will be surprised if there are no brain there. But we are allowed to check rats, for instance, and physical addiction is there. And it was shown very early. Which, of course, again, I mean, for the modern type Joseph Goebbels minds is extremely nice. You have a gadget that makes people addicted, so you can control them. And I'm not talking about the New World Order or anything like that. I'm talking about just making them consume the right things, namely the things that are on the shelf. You know, we used to go to a shop asking for things I wanted to have. Do you have eggs? Yes or no? Nowadays you go to a shop, oh, they have this and that and so on. It's pre-decided what you should wear, eat, and so on, you know. Someone has decided for you, but not for this Danish farmer. I love him, you know, he's a great guy. What a man, you know. But I'm a little bit surprised that his wife takes it, you know, because sometimes it's very primitive. So.
Okay, we get another question for you over here.
Hello, sir. I'm B. Hope, and thank you for a brilliant presentation.
Oh, thank you so much.
Very, very humorous, too. So I have two things I want to ask you. First, are you familiar with a guy called Barry Trower?
Yes.
Because I wanted to hear a guy who knows more about this than I do, if he is credible, and what do you think about him? Just short.
I always have the stance that every human being is credible. But that doesn't mean that what they say I could support. And many of the things he claims, I cannot find any support for in the scientific domain. But he's certainly a credible man when it goes to taking a pint or something like that, you know. So.
Okay, thank you. Very informative. And my second one was, what do you think? What is your personal opinion about being a very informed man? How can the majority of people in not only Denmark and Sweden, just most of the Western countries probably, be unaware / ignorant of the fact that all these masts and everything is so toxic for us? How can we not know that?
That's a very interesting comment of yours, because at least in Sweden, media has done a fantastic job. Newspapers, tabloids, radio, television has covered this in extenso, as you say in Latin. They have done so much, so no one can claim not to have been informed. But of course, the recipients, the consumers of media, they pick what they want to see and read what they want to know and so on. And you know, when I'm out traveling, for instance, in Sweden, I always try people by being naive. I don't say who I am. I just ask questions like, have you thought about these mobile phones and all this radiation? And the most common answer is, no. What's about it? Once in a while, people, yeah, I read something about it. Recently, there was a man from the telecom industry who called me, and he said that, well, you have to at least admit that it's a good idea to use hands-free so you get the phone away from your head. And I said, no way, it's the opposite. You should actually have it up here, because if you have a hands-free, you will move it towards very sensitive areas in your body, especially the gonads, producing egg cells in women and sperm cells in men. So that's contradictory to what I would recommend. And then he said, gee, now you beat me again, you know. So he was very concerned, but he thought that the solution was to just remove it and hold it in your hand, which it's not.
Well, unfortunately, our time is over. So this is going to be all the questions that we're going to take for today. But I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone here for the information and the spirit you brought to the conference. Thank you.
Thank you.